We're actually going to make a transition directly into a panel on racial justice and equity, and talk about how companies are responding to the movement moment, how you're using various tools at your disposal and addressing issues of equity internally and externally. Before we do that, though, before I introduce the panelists, I want to share a message from Ebony Beckwith. She's with Salesforce, and it's a recorded message about how they're viewing this moment of racial justice in dealing with COVID-19.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Ebony Beckwith, CEO of the Salesforce Foundation and Chief Philanthropy Officer at Salesforce. It is so inspiring to see so many great colleagues and like minds here today, even if we need to be together virtually. I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity to be with all of you and to come together and share what's working and where we can improve. You know, it's no surprise that we are living through converging crises right now. And as philanthropists, grant makers, corporate leaders, and community members, it can be really overwhelming to know just where to focus our impact with so much going on. Like all of you, I never, ever could have imagined what 2020 would throw at us. And when I look back at our original plan, I have to laugh and then just throw it all away because we are living in a completely different world right now. But given all these twists and turns, I can't believe how much we've accomplished and how much we've overcome. And today I'm going to share some of the ways that we've addressed these crises. Certainly not because we have it all figured out, but I hope that by sharing our learnings, we can inspire some new ideas for you and your teams. So when we first realized the magnitude of the pandemic, it became very clear that it would shine a light on existing inequalities. This led us to act really quickly. We needed to make sure that our money and our efforts went to those who were most impacted and who needed extra care and resources. So we brought together a group of 20 Bay Area companies to help move that needle, to move faster. We shared research, made introductions, and focused our giving efforts. And this created a ripple effect that encouraged others to join us. We also put the full power of Salesforce behind our support, and we've now donated more than $29 million to address the pandemic, $20 million to local schools to support them during this difficult and ever-changing school year. And we also donated 50 million pieces of PPE to hospitals and first responders. And as the pandemic raged on, it was really clear that communities of color were being hit the hardest. The murder of George Floyd was a tipping point for us, and we started having a series of conversations from our most junior employee all the way up to the CEO about systemic racism. We hosted open dialogues and dedicated time in our weekly all-hands call to the subject. I have to say that it was uncomfortable, it was really emotional, it was really emotionally tough, but we knew we had to have these conversations and really listen with empathy. We also knew that we had to take action, so we assembled a racial equality and justice task force led by our equality, our recruiting, our philanthropy, procurement, and government affairs teams, really to inform how we best drive racial equality within our four walls and in our communities. These actions include brand new goals like a commitment to increase our representation of U.S. Black employees by 50% by the end of 2023. And over the next 3 years, we'll also spend $100 million with Black-owned businesses. Over the next 5 years, we'll invest a total of $200 million and 1 million volunteer hours with organizations really working to advance racial equality and justice. But we know that we cannot drive impact alone. For meaningful and lasting change, we know we have to collaborate and work together with our employees, with our leaders, with our partners, and with the community. It's only when we work together that there can be no boundaries to the good that we can do. And I'm so excited to be doing this work with all of you. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you to Ebony and to Salesforce for sharing their perspective on this critical issue. I want to take a moment to introduce Olivia Khalili and Melynnie Rizvi to the conversation. Olivia is with PagerDuty and Melynnie is with SurveyMonkey. And we're going to talk to them a little bit about race and social justice at this moment. And during the conversation, once again, you'll have the opportunity to pose your questions in the Q&A function. We'll gather those and share as many as possible. Just as we warm up, I'd like each of you, and maybe Olivia first, what did Alicia's comments raise for you, and how did it make you reflect on the work you're doing for your company or you're trying to do?
Sure. Thanks, Dwayne and Alicia. And I'm really pleased to be with you today. I lead social impact for PagerDuty, and I wanted to also share my preferred pronouns of she and her. That was a really powerful conversation, I mean, in the context of so much that is going on, but some of the points that stuck out to me, both as a citizen that is trying to build increased support and outcomes around racial equity within the context of a company, is moving from the call to move from symbol to substance. And how do you really make this work transformational and sustainable? I think a lot about how we have what I see as a moment in time to leverage and mobilize more support for equity work within a company. But how do we ensure that that moment in time doesn't fizzle out, right? And so how is this that sustaining transformation? And I also really was connected to her remarks around get out of the way and let the experts do the work. And we can speak, I'm happy to speak more about how we think about that within a role of driving social impact and philanthropy through a corporate setting, but that's certainly one of our commitments.
Great, thank you. Melynnie.
Thanks, Dwayne, and thanks for having me. I am so excited to be here today, and listening to Alicia was awesome. I lead SurveyMonkey for Good. I work for a company called SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey for Good is our social impact and diversity, equity, and inclusion program. I'm also Deputy General Counsel, and I lead our global employment law function. So I'm an attorney doing social impact and DEI work, which I think makes me a little bit of a unique individual in this space. But as an attorney, looking at what is happening on the racial justice landscape right now is, it's an incredibly challenging thing to do. One of the things that resonated for me is her talk around needing transformation to make Black Lives Matter, and also the deep work that we have to do to really understand racism and what to do about it. And that is really an approach that we have taken at SurveyMonkey. So we believe that this is a long-term fight, and we are doing work to be transformational and to really work to dismantle the systems of racism, and not viewing this as a moment, but as a long-time journey to make an impact.
And Melynnie, maybe you could say a bit more specifically how you guys have started to do that, particularly in this movement moment. And then, of course, I'll ask the same of as we go on.
Sure. Yeah. So, SurveyMonkey, for those of you who haven't heard of us, we are a data company. So our mission is to empower others with data in order to make an impact, to change the human experience. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is use our products to empower others to do that. So we've created a racial equity resources page where we've developed survey templates. So we have an amazing survey research team. We work with them really closely to basically help develop questions that others can use to send out surveys to gather data around various different sentiments. So we have developed survey templates around racial equity. So employers can survey their employees to gather data on how employees are feeling about race and racial justice, how employees are feeling in terms of how they belong in a workplace, and are they able to bring forth concerns about race to their managers, to their employers. We've developed our own, what we call belonging and inclusion survey. So one of the things that Alicia talked about was diversity is, sort of move towards this value of representation, but not really towards transformation and change. And we are trying to move past that by developing our own survey in terms of belonging and inclusion, and we measure that within our own population. So it's not just about numbers, but it's about, do people feel like they truly belong at SurveyMonkey? Do they feel like they can truly do their best work here? And that for us is more important. One of the other things that we are looking at is we are looking outside of our now virtual four walls, or many walls, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, but we are looking to outside of our four walls and into things like who we do business with. So one of the initiatives we launched last month or at the end of August was our vendor diversity initiative. So traditionally companies have looked at, am I doing business with Black-owned organizations, with women-owned organizations, which is great. But particularly in the tech industry, we do a lot of business with public companies, and you don't know who the owners are necessarily of those companies. It's all of the shareholders who own stock in that company. And so we developed a survey. We asked about 20 companies to join us in sort of this initial cohort to make a difference. We're thrilled to have PagerDuty join us in that. But we are asking companies to ask their vendors, what does your board representation look like? What does your executive leadership team representation look like? Do you have inclusionary practices in your organization? So do you have employee resource groups that are doing great work? Have you set goals in terms of representation of your workforce? So what are you doing as an organization in order to make change, in order to foster diversity and inclusion? And then companies can decide where they want to spend their money. So this group of 20 companies that we have has several $1 billion in spending power. And once they have this data, they can decide, we want to spend our money on organizations that are scoring well on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So just some of the things that we are trying to do to use our resources and our platform to make a difference.
Thank you. Olivia, I know you guys also have been trying to take some specific steps.
Yeah, it's I love hearing about SurveyMonkey because it's so integrated into the core product and the value proposition as a company. So PagerDuty is a B2B software company. We're a SaaS company, and we make a digital operations management platform. The way that we are approaching this is through an integrated holistic approach, but we're using some different levers, and I want to talk about those. And so if we think about how do we engage the voice of our company, our philanthropic dollars, we have a fund that we launched last year, our employee engagement, and then product. And so I'll speak to kind of each of these in the context of racial equity and justice. We have a female CEO who has kind of maintained historically a powerful voice in driving diversity in the sector. And so she was early and vocal in providing public support for, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and also in engaging our employees internally. So we have made public statements, not that statements is where it stops, but starting with statements, we've engaged Derek Johnson, who's the head of the NAACP, to speak at our annual user conference last month as a keynote. We've hosted internal employee conversations. And then we've also tried to really shift how we are engaging employees in this. So we created Juneteenth as a day off of education, advocacy, and reflection, and this will be into perpetuity. So we created an extensive toolkit for our employees with expectations of how they're going to utilize that time away from meetings. We have open sourced that, and I believe that attendees of this conference will be able to see that if that's of interest. And so that was a cross-functional effort internally. We also redefined our paid volunteer time off. Employees of PagerDuty have 20 hours annually to volunteer. And this year we expanded it to include participation in peaceful demonstration and advocacy, really to encourage people to utilize their voice, to be an ally for different communities, even if they're not feeling the immediate impact, or they had previously felt that. We have also included time off for voting and voter engagement. And then within our philanthropy and our fund, we made rapid response grants to NAACP, Black Lives Matter. You heard Alicia mention lots of the funding that was coming in. PagerDuty was, kind of a drip in that fire hose, which is so gratifying to see. And then we also made a significant contribution of $500,000 that we will continue to put toward a new portfolio with a specific intent to combat systemic discrimination this year. So $500,000 commitment there. And then our other key area of focus was this time critical health. This has been our North Star investment through our philanthropy. And we added an explicit criteria for equity within that. And so we have embedded equity throughout all of the grant making that we'll do, in addition to standing up a specific portfolio around combating systemic discrimination. And I'm really excited. We're starting to embark on the beginning of how do we do this in a participatory fashion. So much to which means, to what Alicia spoke to, how do we engage the experts so that this money is not coming from us into the communities through our construct, but that we are really empowering and leveraging the experts doing this work at a grassroots level to help to guide and shape this strategy and work.
So so many things layered in there. I'm curious for both of you, and maybe Olivia, you can start. What's been the reaction, both internally and external, to some of the steps you've taken? How have employees responded? How have you been perceived in the field?
So, internally, the response has been really positive from employees. Someone in my position where I am trying to, a key outcome of my work is employee engagement. It feels like it's never enough, but the Day for Change that we hosted on Juneteenth was a really powerful moment of pause and reflection and open sharing for our company. And our CEO and other members of our leadership team have continued to host discussions and ask me anything. So we've seen some positive response with our employees. I mean, I think internally or externally rather, the approach that we've taken, and then I want to be clear, we are learners in this journey. We are a small company to begin with. We have fewer than 800 employees. We are a new foundation to this work, and we are new at really investing more heavily in equity work. So part of my goal is to learn from the community, but also be transparent and share what we're learning. And so whatever we do, or if it's around voter engagement, you can see my background. I'm trying to come on brand. We have huge voter engagement initiatives that we are driving with a focus in minority communities, and our Day for Change. We are making public all of the work that we've done internally through resourcing and activation.
Yeah, and I would say the response at SurveyMonkey has been overwhelmingly positive as well. SurveyMonkey, for those of you who don't know much about the company, DEI has really always been in our DNA. Our board is 50% men, 50% women, and we have two of the 5 women are women of color. Our leadership team is 50% men and 50% women, with 1 woman of color. So it is something that has been paramount to us as an organization before May of 2020. And so I think the response has sort of been like, yes, thank goodness, let's keep going. And really, it has really been a catalyst for us to prioritize and double down on the work that we're doing. And, we've made statements about, we're not just against what is happening, but we are going to strive to be an anti-racist organization. And we are, I just presented our roadmap for 2021, and we have a long-term strategy in order to work towards dismantling systemic racism and using our products and our resources in the best way that we can do that.
Great. We have about 7 minutes left. And so I've got a couple more questions plus some audience questions I want to get us to. But has there been any negative reactions to the work you're doing? And if so, how have you guys managed to navigate those? And perhaps, I don't know, Olivia, have you experienced any, or maybe you could even speak positive, yes.
No, I mean, I haven't received the negative interactions. I do want to share briefly that we've also, in addition to the vendor diversity commitments we've made alongside of SurveyMonkey, we also recently announced a commitment to diversify our board further and to have 1 Black member by the end of the year. And we are also looking at how do we implement and embed the equity work throughout the core operations of our company and our board, in addition to the work that the social impact and our inclusion, diversity, and equity team drive. But no, we have not. I mean, I think the calls have been continue forward, like do more, continue to from our employees, and particularly our employee resource groups of Black and Latinx. It's continue to listen and engage, but do your work. Don't rely on us to feed. To be your key partners in your own learning.
Yeah, that anything you'd add, Melynnie?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I would agree. We haven't experienced any negative reactions. The reactions that we have experienced that were not overwhelmingly positive, or really, I would say, sort of confusion and requests for help. Right. So we have a lot of allies in our company who really did not know how to deal with discussing racial equity in the workplace, how to support their Black and Brown team members, peers, colleagues. And so that is probably, I would say, the reaction that we were dealing with. And then I think it was really a wake-up call. We did a lot of listening circles around the company with our executive team, and some of our board members came. And I think it was a real challenge for some people to really see the trauma and the anger and the frustration that leaders, Black and Brown leaders all across our company were going through. And so I wouldn't say it was negative, but it was definitely uncomfortable and a desire to change, but not knowing how to change.
I hear you. Curious for both of you, what does, maybe you can speak to your own perspective, and maybe also there's an organizational perspective that's been stated. Alicia spoke about the need for moving beyond diversity, equity, inclusion, and getting to transformation. What does transformation look like to you 2 to 5 years from now as you continue in this work? Olivia, maybe you can go first.
Great. So it's really important to me that we are architecting equity throughout the business. So building on who we hire, who we develop and accelerate, who we take money from. I love this quote that I heard from Doug Roush, who is one of the founders of, or former CEO of Trader Joe's. And he said, it's not, I really don't care who you're giving your money to, it's who you're taking it from. So how are we earning our dollars, and how are we doing that in a way that really perpetuates and extends our values around, and our platform and our symbolic speech around equity. So one of the projects I'm working on now with our legal team is redefining our ethical use policy for customers. So looking at that, those policies, our vendors, our board composition, our leadership composition, taking that really, really seriously. How are we doing training? How are we developing, advancing people internally? So those are some of the elements that I'd like to see us continue to drive value. I do feel that businesses have an acute responsibility for this work. We build these systems, we perpetuate these systems, we profit from these systems, and we need to be part of the true transformation. And I think, collectively we are learning what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add, if I could be here in 5 years and say that SurveyMonkey has become a leader in terms of being an anti-racist organization, that, internally we center how we operate and everything we do around race equity, and that we've used our platform and our products and our resources to be able to empower others to become anti-racist organizations, that would be success to me.
Great. One final question, and perhaps Melynnie, you can start. You got one piece of advice you can get to all your colleagues in similar positions, and they're going to take it. No questions asked. They're going to lean in. What advice would you give them about addressing these issues authentically? And if there's a caution you'd offer, what would you throw in as well?
Sure. So my philosophy around making an impact is twofold. There has to be accountability, and you have to build it into how you do business every day. So this needs to become part of companies' OKRs. We need to measure a company's success and financial performance around this work. And we need to hold leaders accountable for that. The two ways you do that are make sure that their boss is on board and holds them accountable, or you tie compensation to performance. And so those would be the things that I would advise someone who is doing this work, is strive towards achieving those things. And as a company, you will succeed.
Right. Olivia?
Absolutely, 100%. I also think operationally, to create a working body, working group that is cross-functional internally and very senior level to drive these initiatives, so that you have some joint accountability in addition to it's a joint operational committee in addition to the accountability. I think that is a key for success. And then, to, as individuals and as companies, to continue to reflect on why are we doing this? Why are we doing the work? I think really can help drive kind of the essentialism of the outcome, and also to reorient and re-inspire when the work is tough. Because when you get down into the OKRs, you can kind of to sometimes lose sight of what is that bigger impact.
Great, thank you. And obviously the more detail within those answers you gave, but hopefully we'll be able to make the connections so folks can share those experiences. I want to thank both of you for your time and contribution to this panel and the work that you're doing to transform your own organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Melynnie.